Good evening. Welcome to APTN News Weekend. I'm Melissa Ridgen. The Pope is coming to Canada this summer, and we know where he will stop during his trip. The Vatican says he will visit Alberta, Quebec, and Nunavut in late July. He'll be staying in Edmonton, Quebec City, and Iqaluit while traveling around, visiting Indigenous communities. The locations were chosen by the Vatican and were based around the Pope's mobility and health issues. Last month, the Pope apologized for the Roman Catholic Church's role in residential schools. Well, the search for a woman in Vancouver who was missing for nearly 2 years came to a tragic end this week. As APTN's Tina House reports, there are still many questions about what happened to her and how the police handled the investigation. We must warn you that some viewers might find some details in this story disturbing.
On this normally quiet street in one of Vancouver's most prominent neighborhoods, a contractor renovating this vacant mansion found the skeletal remains of Chelsea Poorman. The 24-year-old has been missing since September the 8th, 2020, after getting separated from her sister Paige after a night on Granville Street, just a 10-minute drive from here.
She went through so much trauma. She overcame so much. But to end up like this is not right.
Since her disappearance, her family, friends, and members of the community launched an intense search for the young woman, who had only been in Vancouver for 3 weeks after just moving here from Saskatchewan to start a better life. Her family said she didn't know anyone in the city, and it wasn't like her to not be in touch. Her family says they reported it to the Vancouver police, but say the police did not immediately start the search, didn't interview her sister Paige right away, or request for surveillance videos from the area.
How many more Chelseas? Every single person has a responsibility to do everything they can to stop this, and they're not.
Over 100 people gathered outside the house where she was found to pay their respects to the family and to demand justice for Chelsea after Vancouver police called her death not suspicious. Chelsea's mom Sheila says she is enraged they deemed it not suspicious after getting details from the coroner.
I was told from the coroner, and I had to ask him twice if what he said was true. He said that Chelsea wasn't fully intact. She was missing her cranium, and she was missing some fingers. And they have the gall to say that it's not suspicious and no foul play.
We do not believe that Chelsea was murdered. We don't believe that her death was caused by another person. The exact cause of death may never be known, and at this point it's considered to be undetermined.
Her family and advocates are demanding that the police do a more thorough job and find out what happened to her and who is responsible.
VPD, you need to respect the Poorman family. When you said her case is not suspicious, is hurtful and harmful to our people. VPD needs to apologize to our relatives, the Poorman family.
Adding to the mystery is that Chelsea was discovered on one of these 2 balconies here in the back of the house. Now, there is no way to access the balconies from the outside, and her family confirms that Chelsea had a disability in her arm, making it nearly impossible for her to scale the side of the building to get onto the balcony. Police have also revealed that not only was she not intact when she was discovered, but there was a blanket placed on top of her. The owner is overseas, and this house has sat empty for the last couple of years. That is until just a couple weeks ago, when contractors made the grisly discovery.
VPD barely even looked. It was our people, our way as Indigenous people, our strength as Indigenous people. You know who is suspicious? VPD.
According to her sister Paige, after they got separated that night, she called her sister, and Chelsea said that she had met a new bae and that she was okay. That was the last time anyone heard from her, and then her phone was turned off. They believe that Poorman died near the time of her disappearance, and toxicology tests were not possible. And on this Mother's Day, instead of celebrating this day, her mother, Sheila Poorman, and her family are in deep mourning over the loss of Chelsea and asking what really happened to her. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
To the Northwest Territories now. Not only do flood evacuees who are fleeing their homes want to know when they will be able to return, they also want to know whether they can expect ice jam flooding every spring from now on. There are water levels there not seen since the 1960s. Daryl Stranger has more.
Darlene Lamb only had a few minutes to flee the floodwaters quickly encroaching her beloved home on Vail Island, Hay River, Northwest Territories.
Grabbing stuff, went running out the door, and by the time I got to the truck, the water was everywhere. That's how fast it came.
Around 400 residents live on Vail Island on the east side of town. This year they've seen extreme flooding caused by high water levels and ice jams along the Hay River. The various sections of town began evacuating over the last few days, and on Wednesday evening, with the risk of downed power lines and swift-moving ice and water, the entire town of just over 3,000 has been ordered to evacuate.
Well, I didn't want to leave, but the mayor called me, and I could hear it in her voice that she was urging me to leave, and that there was all that ice that's frozen and packed, and there's a heck of a lot of water coming still. And once that water hits the ice or whatever and it goes, we don't know what direction it's going to go.
The nearby Dene communities of N.W.T First Nation and West Point First Nation are also under evacuation notice, with elders and families going to the local wellness center. But according to membership, space is limited and not everyone has a place to stay.
Because there's no room anywhere. Oh. So there's no room at the treatment center. I'm not sure about the DCI, but I know there's people there too. But we had a choice either to stay at home. So because there's no room at the old treatment center.
Emotions ran high at a town hall meeting on Tuesday.
Every year we get evacuated, and you see there's no exit, but we know there's an exit from at the end of the channel going to the airport.
The turnout was in the hundreds.
Is there more information, real-time information, that we as citizens may have more access to plan accordingly? And I've got a farm of 118,000 birds, and it's a rather big operation that I've got to make a lot of stage decisions based on probabilities.
Residents here say there's been a lack of communication and question why the town wasn't better prepared when they knew they were at risk of flooding this year.
Is there any policy that's going to be in place with regards to sandbagging the current or at-risk properties?
When it comes to the monitors on the river, my understanding is some of them weren't quite, they're a little erroneous readings. I was personally using those to kind of read what was coming.
Town officials say the town so far has $1.4 million from the feds for Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, but most will go to repairs, and the new projects would require new money.
The realities of forecasting ice jams and the predictability of those situations on the rivers really aren't developed.
Beatrice Lapine, an elder who has lived in town her whole life, says leadership needs to consult with locals who have suggestions.
We could raise that road and create a partial berm. I'm glad I got you all here because people are talking about it as a practical way.
For Lamb, as her community slips underwater, she just hopes everyone is updated in real time.
I got so many people messaging me, in phone calls, Facebook, whatever, just because they start finding out that I'm still there and that they want to know how's their house doing. They just need information and it's not getting out. I can understand the town and that's busy, but even if they hired somebody that's on ground zero that's there and said, can you get this information out for us? People would volunteer. They just have to ask for it, So people are really frustrated.
As breakup continues and many parts of the river are still blocked with ice, the situation could get worse before it gets better. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Canadian Feminist Alliance for International Action released a report on Monday that finds, like many before it, that the RCMP continues to be tainted by widespread misogyny, racism, and violence against women. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Accusations of racism, sexism, and violence against women, both within and outside the RCMP, are not new. But a new report brings these allegations into focus and calls on the government to take action. Pam Palmater, one of the FAFIA report's co-authors, says it builds upon what is already known.
Well, by bringing it all together, we can show this ongoing pattern of refusing to make changes. And because of their refusal to make changes, women inside and outside the RCMP continue to be physically assaulted, raped, and suffer the ongoing mental health issues, post-traumatic stress, and some of them commit suicide.
Shivangi Misra also co-authored the report. She says it is clear the force is not only failing to protect women within the RCMP from violence, but also women and the public at large. Misra says 2020's mass shooting in Nova Scotia is just one example of this.
There were complaints made by the shooter's partner about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and they refused to act on time, which has led to femicide and other violence against, a very systemic, broad violence against women.
The report calls on the government to create an independent oversight body and perform an external review of the Mounties. The force does have a civilian review and complaints commission, but Misra says this is not working.
But it's also because the current oversight and accountability mechanism is not truly independent. It is intertwined with the RCMP itself. So if there are women who complain against the misconduct of RCMP officers, it is the RCMP that investigates itself. And then these recommendations and these implementations, it's the RCMP commissioner that has the final ultimate say on these recommendations.
Palmater says the review should explore serious structural changes to the RCMP, which could include dismantling the force if necessary.
We're calling for an independent review, but it's for a very specific purpose, for the purpose of legislative changes, for the purpose of potentially, if the review looks like these can't be fixed, dismantling the RCMP, for the purpose of providing supports for women. I mean, all of these things are incredibly important.
The RCMP's headquarters in Ottawa did not respond to APTN's request for comment. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We need to take a break, but when we come back, new calls to stop 2 pipelines. Stay with us. Welcome back. Anti-pipeline advocates from multiple nations in BC are calling on the Canadian government to stop the Trans Mountain and Coastal GasLink pipelines. They say a new letter from the United Nations confirms their rights are being violated. Lee Wilson has more on that.
Indigenous rights experts, anti-pipeline advocates from the Wet'suwet'en, Secwepemc, and Tsleil-Waututh nations held a press conference calling for the stop to 2 pipelines. They say a recent letter from the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, or CERD, confirms the Trans Mountain and Coastal GasLink pipelines are in violation of international laws by not obtaining proper consent. The CERD letter also calls for negotiation between parties and an investigation of the RCMP actions against protesters. Slato, Molly Wickham, spokesperson of the Gidimt'en Access Point, says the construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline and RCMP arrests in Wet'suwet'en territory are a violation of their rights.
When I read the third letter from CERD, I felt overwhelmed by the recognition that our experiences are a violation of international human rights and Indigenous rights. The construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline project and the RCMP's treatment of me and other land offenders is a violation of our humanity as Indigenous people.
The Coastal GasLink pipeline has been a controversial project in northern BC. According to the pipeline builder, CGL, the 670-kilometer natural gas pipeline has consent from the 20 First Nation band councils along the route. But Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have remained opposed to it running through their territory. This conflict has led to RCMP raids and arrests for 3 consecutive years. In Secwepemc territory, Canahouse Manuel, spokesperson from the Tiny House Warriors, opposes the Trans Mountain pipeline. She says they expressed their concerns in Canada, but now they're voicing them internationally.
To express the human rights violations that are happening in Canada. And these other international institutions are recognizing that human rights are being violated here in Canada, and insurance companies are starting to walk away from this project, financiers, etc.
The Tiny House Warriors built tiny homes along the Trans Mountain Pipeline route. In 2018, the Canadian government purchased the pipeline from Kinder Morgan after they wanted out of the project due to environmental opposition. According to the Trans Mountain Pipeline Corporation, Canada approved the pipeline expansion in 2019. The pipeline runs between Alberta and BC, transporting about 300,000 barrels of oil per day, but the expansion would allow 890,000 barrels per day. According to Manuel, confrontations with the RCMP's Community Industry Response Group remain ongoing on the pipeline route. Judy Wilson of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs said since Canada owns the Trans Mountain project, they must stop the pipeline.
And since Canada owns the Trans Mountain Pipeline, these human rights obligations apply to those states. And Canada must stop the construction because they're further violating those human rights obligations.
We contacted the Canadian government, but did not hear back before airtime. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
Many honored Red Dress Day earlier this month, including a pair of Winnipeg sisters who wanted to show their support. But they say they were disappointed their schools wouldn't honor the day. Daryl Stranger has that.
Peggy Lee and Margarita Brenton both wore red to their schools for Red Dress Day on May 5th. They wanted to honor those women that had been lost while also spread awareness, but say their schools did not recognize the day. Peggy Lee is a grade 10 student at College Sturgeon Heights Collegiate.
Nothing was spoken, nothing was shown, nothing was said. And it was like our voices were being silenced again and ignored. And I was very heartbroken to know that something that's so serious, something that's life or death for our people, was simply being ignored and pushed aside like it was nothing.
Despite the school sending a message to remind students and staff of the day, nothing was done. Margarita is a grade 8 student at École Ness.
I was upset when I noticed that none of the staff nor the students were wearing any sort of red in honor of our sisters. It was not mentioned in school. There was no announcement of it. But my teacher, taking our attendance, put Cinco de Mayo on the board because it was the Day of the Dead, but didn't put MMIWG on the board.
Peggy Lee says she felt hopeless by the lack of acknowledgement.
It makes you feel hopeless because this is really a matter of life or death. Like, we actually die and go missing all of the time. I could be next. My sister could be next. My mother could be next. It doesn't matter to them because it's not their sisters or mothers that are going missing. It's not their life at risk. But to us, our lives are literally at risk.
The girl's father says he was disheartened when they told him what happened.
It's very disheartening that that's what we got for a school board, because it's their responsibility. We don't expect the students, every student, to know about this. We send our kids to school to learn and to understand what's going on around them. It's our school boards and our teachers that should be teaching this. And it's never going to stop or slow down or anything unless people are aware and are outraged about it.
We reached out to St. James's Assiniboia School Division, which governs both schools, and they sent the following email when asked about the situation, saying, in part, "Our school division is on its own reconciliation journey, educating our students, families, staff, and community. While some of our schools chose to honor murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls on May 5th, our other schools will plan to do it on the provincial date of October 4th. The sisters hope more education around MMIWG is needed and the schools need to get on board." Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Time for us to take one more break, but still ahead, an asteroid that honors an Indigenous adventurer. We'll tell you about that when we come back. Welcome back. A flying rock orbiting between Mars and Jupiter has a new name honoring a Yukon First Nations adventurer and discoverer of Klondike gold. As Sarah Connors tells us, for many Yukoners, it's an honor that is truly out of this world.
You'll need a telescope to see it, but way up in space, an asteroid now bears the name of a legendary Yukon First Nations figure. Dubbed Skookum Jim, the asteroid gets its name from one of the founders of the Klondike Gold Rush. Keish, more popularly known as Skookum Jim Mason, was a Tlingit Tagish man who co-discovered gold in 1897 in the Bonanza Creek near Dawson City.
People are talking about it, saying it's pretty neat and it's cool. And
Carcross Tagish First Nation Deputy Hasha Duhen Mariah Benoit has a connection to Skookum Jim. Her grandfather, Tagish John, was Jim's nephew. Benoit says the First Nation is thrilled Jim is being recognized in outer space.
I was very surprised, as well as a lot of other people, that an asteroid is going to be named after Skookum Jim, but we're actually very proud of that as well.
Benoit says Skookum means strong, a fitting name for the asteroid, which is estimated to be between 8 and 19 kilometers in diameter.
Skookum Jim was well known to be a strong, hefty, strong person that used to help the miners carry over their items over the mountain during the gold rush. So this asteroid is apparently quite huge, and it's big and it's strong. So it's a proper name for the asteroid.
So this is the finder, and it helps you locate generally where you want to be on the sky, and then you.
Krista Van Leerhoven is the president of the Yukon Astronomical Society. She says back in 2018, her chapter was asked to submit names to the International Astronomical Union, which names objects in space.
The name that came to us naturally was Skookum Jim. During his contribution to the gold rush and that kickoff, as a single person who had a very large impact on Yukon history, it just made sense.
Last month, the society learned their submission was chosen. Van Leerhoven says Skookum Jim orbits the sun between Jupiter and Mars, an area commonly known as the asteroid belt.
But the stars stay stationary and the asteroid moves, and that's how you find them.
It takes about 5 1/3 years to orbit around the sun. Its orbit is not quite circular, just a little bit what we call eccentric, a slightly non-circular orbit, and the orbit is tilted at about 15 degrees relative to Earth's orbit.
Benoit hopes the asteroid will help Skookum Jim's name live on.
So we're very excited about that, and I think people will start paying more attention and looking for it.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Carcross.
Well, that is a wrap on what made National Indigenous News this week. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.